Looking at, I guess, a bit of history now, recent history, but we saw a lot of negative impacts of the move in some regards to European liquidity. Is that a problem going to be replicated with APAC funds, perhaps, when Europe moves? Jim, I'll get you to comment on that one.
Yeah, so from an ETF perspective, I would say that it was more of a pricing impact than a liquidity impact. Liquidity, for the most part, was still there. ETF volumes, underlying volumes, continue to increase post-US migration. The pricing impact, though, was we've heard about the Thursday price effect, and kind of what was happening there in practice was that because the underlying markets, the underlying securities, and the underlying hedging instruments were on a T+1 settlement cycle, but for the US, but the ETFs that were tracking those US securities remained on a T+2 cycle as standard. What was happening is that the brokers were having to either fund or hedge their positions for an additional day. If you think about that from a Thursday perspective, it becomes 3 days as they're doing that over the weekend. So you had this Thursday price effect where ETF tracking US underlying securities traded at a premium on a Thursday, and then that kind of came back in line on a Friday and Monday as well. What we're going to see from an APAC perspective is a similar dynamic, but the other way around. If you think of the way that the primary market operates for any ETFs that track Asian or global securities, the orders are placed on a T-1 basis. What that means is if you create a redeem today, the trade date is the following business day, so trade date would be tomorrow. However, if you're trading those same ETFs in the secondary market, if you're pricing on behalf of a client today, trade date would be tomorrow. So the create redeem process is always a day behind. So what we're working through now as an industry is the ability to do T0 settlement to facilitate creates on those T-1 orders on a T0 basis to allow the settlement cycles for the primary trade and the secondary trade to align. If we go back to Adam's point, though, where that disconnect happens is on the redeem leg, because the redemption cycle, we can't do T0 because the funds would be overdrawn and ETFs don't have standing overdraft facilities set up. So we have to maintain the settlement cycle, as I mentioned earlier, in line with the underlying securities for redemption. So anything that has APAC securities in there would be T+2. So you would have the ETF trading T+1 in the secondary market. It would trade T+2 for a redemption in the primary market. And that redemption would be on a T-1 basis as well. So again, the brokers are left having to fund or hedge their positions for an additional 2 days, which over the weekend would become 4 days. And so rather than see these ETFs that track US underlying trade at a premium on a Thursday, what you may now see as ETFs that track global or Asia underlying trade at a discount on a Thursday. But the flip side of that is that that pricing dynamic for the ETF tracking US securities essentially goes away because the ETF, the underlying securities, and the underlying hedge instruments will all have that T+1 settlement cycle. So we remove one dynamic, but it creates a slightly different dynamic. Albeit it isn't a liquidity issue, it's just more of a pricing effect. So you will see that kind of discount impact on a Thursday more profound than the other days of the week for those ETFs that track the Asia or global securities.
And presumably bank holidays make it even harder because those are not globally standardized either.
Yeah, exactly. Bank holidays and then you have those kind of week-long holidays in certain markets as well that will all exasperate it. Those kind of dynamics, though, we have currently, and that's something that's kind of commonplace. And that's why you have ETF teams, capital markets teams that can help clients and give them some trading guidance around these kind of impacts when there is misalignment with the ETF settlement and the underlying security settlement. So that's something that is fairly common already, but it may be slightly exasperated whilst we have the Asia securities on T+2 settlement cycle and the ETF and the majority of the global securities on a T+1 settlement cycle.
Sure, and that makes it clear why it's much better to have everything on the same settlement cycle across the globe, right? Why everyone moves eventually.